Oh, howdy, all. Grab yourself a beer. It's time for some Path of Exile discussion. So today I wanted to put together a video outlining why I think the Trickster is in a really bad place at the current time, and giving a few suggestions as to how the Trickster could be changed in order to make it a more exciting Ascendancy. I don't actually think that numbers buffs alone, like for instance doubling the effects of the notable Prolonged Pain, would be something that would make the Trickster particularly compelling. It might make it the best Ascendancy for certain builds, but it's not going to make it something that's exciting. It would just be a boring, I'm the best because the numbers say I'm the best Ascendancy. So I want to talk about my suggestions for a new identity that would fit with the concept of a Trickster quite well, and that would enable some builds to be played that currently require a high level of gear, something that would allow them to be played at a lower level of gear. Anyways, let's get onto it, and we'll talk quickly about the current state of the Trickster Ascendancy. Now, I'm saying here that it's the third best at everything. I get sort of third, fourth, fifth, second, depending on the specific build. But for damage over time builds, the Trickster has a lot of support for damage over time characters, and as a result, it's a pretty solid choice for these, but it tends never to be the best choice. So in the past, the Trickster was a lot better than it is now. It's not so much the Trickster has been nerfed much. It has been nerfed, but the main thing that's happened is that other Ascendancies have been buffed, and Trickster hasn't kept up with that. There's been a lot of sort of power creep that's been going on. Trickster, in a couple of spots, is worse than it used to be, but it's not been overwhelmingly nerfed. It's not been absolutely gutted. So in the past, it was often seen as a cultist but better, and regarded as the best choice for many damage over time builds. When I played a Fireball character in 3.8, Trickster was clearly the right choice for that. You wouldn't consider an Elementalist. Elementalist was Trickster but worse. You wouldn't consider pretty much anything else at the time. It was just, yeah, you're gonna go Trickster or you're gonna go Chieftain, and Trickster was the better of the two. But now it's third to fifth best for Righteous Fire, behind Inquisitor and Chieftain for certain, and arguably Juggernaut and Raider. It's the second best for Chaos spell damage over time behind the Occultist. So that means that if you are wanting to roll a character that's playing Essence Drain Contagion, you might briefly consider the Trickster, then you realize, hang on, I could go Trickster, or I could just go Occultist, and Occultist is better, so I'm going to go Occultist. It's arguably the fourth best for non-poison based chaos damage bow attack damage over time builds. So this is things like Toxic Rain, Raider, Occultist, and Champion all being better for various reasons. Like Raider has the move speed, Champion has the defensive power, Occultist is a balance of all of these things with damage. Trickster just has the damage and is sort of outclassed in damage by Occultist as well, and doesn't have Occultist's other big benefits like 60% chaos resistance, which is no joke. It's third best for cold damage over time, arguably, behind Occultist and Raider, but Occultist and Raider are so much better that you wouldn't consider Trickster. It's fourth best for poison, behind Pathfinder, Assassin, and Occultist, and people play the best choice when they're looking for a damage over time build, unless the alternatives are really compelling. And Trickster isn't. Trickster doesn't do anything really exciting or flashy or cool, whereas you might play, for instance, if Occultist was a little bit stronger than Trickster, if Trickster was slightly stronger than Occultist, you might play Occultist because you like the utility of multiple curses, or because you like the Chaos Explosions, even if it's slightly weaker. Whereas Trickster is just, I don't really do anything particularly amazing. So one thing that Trickster was very popular for in the past was the Ghost Shroud mechanic, and that was moved out of the Trickster Ascendancy and onto the general passive tree. This was essentially a buff to non-Trickster Ascendancies, which pushed them further ahead of the Trickster. So Trickster was arguably the worst Ascendancy by a little bit, or maybe just about level with the bottom couple. Then this came along and lifted everything else up and left Trickster behind. So Trickster went from sort of third best but kind of close to second in a lot of niches to third best by a long way when this happened. And the new node Heartstopper was a failure because of its mechanics. It's not that it's a low power level node, it's sort of quite okay. It's just that it's not very good to have, to have 50% uptime on immunity to damage over time. And it's being used by all Righteous Fire Tricksters. But the thing is, if you want to play a Righteous Fire build, you don't play a Trickster, you play an Inquisitor, because Inquisitor is better at the moment. So this meant that the new node has done nothing to reverse the trend where the Ghost Shroud removal from the Trickster Ascendancy made other Ascendancies better without helping Trickster. So I wanted to ask a hypothetical. What if there's big numbers buffs? So assuming that there's pure numbers buffs here to Trickster's existing strength of damage over time skills. DOT builds will just gravitate towards the best build for their chosen skill, unless there's a huge non-damage benefit like Raider's move speed, or Champion's tankiness. And big buffs to the Trickster won't really change this. It might change which Ascendancy they gravitate towards. So you might see some people that are currently playing Occultist move to the Trickster instead, but they're still going to fundamentally feel like they're playing the same build. It'll just be a different Ascendancy, the character will look a little different, but it'll fundamentally play the same. Now, if Trickster is buffed to the point of being the unquestioned best, it'll just result in a shift away from Inquisitor, Occultist, Pathfinder, and so on. Those people will move over to the Trickster, but that's not changing much because those builds will play roughly the same. That's why I think Trickster needs a new identity, or at least it needs to support a new identity. Not just yet another damage over time build, but something that is genuinely different in its own way. And that's what I'm going to get to when we talk about conversion. So damage conversion is something that Trickster has one notable that supports. Harness the Void is actually really high powered notable. It's one of the better notables available on the entire passive tree. The thing is, it's not taken by much because it doesn't have any synergy with the rest of the Ascendancy. So people can take the entire Ascendancy and get Harness the Void and then sort of not all that much else. You get the power charge node, and then that's really about all you can get if you're playing the sorts of builds that would get a lot of benefit from Harness the Void. You'll find something for the other notables, but you're essentially playing a double ascended character at endgame. And even though Harness the Void is good, it's not so good that it can justify that. So in short, Harness the Void is little used. It's powerful with enough support, but that support is mostly not available in the Trickster Ascendancy. It's available from items. It's available from rare items like Call of the Brotherhood, Taste of Hate, Eternity Shroud, things like that. Very rare items, very powerful items, but ones that you can't really make a build around until you are quite rich in League. This build outright doesn't perform at low gear level. And what I wanted to suggest is, what if we were to change that? What if we were to add some new notables into the Trickster Ascendancy that provide a way to play a conversion build with much less gear than is required to play one at the moment? So I started thinking about the Elementalist rework that took place in the 3.13 expansion. This saw something that I think is a real template for what could be done to fix the Trickster up. And 3.13 added 3 new notables that are significant to the Elementalist: Shaper of Storms, Shaper of Winter, and Shaper of Flame. Now, these aren't equal in power level at the moment. It's definitely the case that Shaper of Storms is the best of them, and Shaper of Winter is the weakest. But most people do seriously consider each of the 3, but don't take all 3. And I think that this is a good spot for Ascendancy notables to be. You can pick and choose the ones that will augment your character's existing strengths, and as a result, there's a lot of flexibility there, as well as a real sense of just building your character potentially differently to how other people are building theirs. And I really like that, and thought that we could do something similar, or propose to do something similar with the Trickster and Elemental Conversion. So there are 3 useful conversions that would work well with Harness the Void: Physical to Lightning, Lightning to Cold, and Cold to Fire. Now you can skip these layers, so you could have, say, Physical directly to Cold, but that tends to be a little bit worse than going multi-step, and that's because of the specific mechanics of how Harness the Void works. Harness the Void multi-dips, so if you have 100 physical damage and then you convert that all to lightning, then you convert that all to cold, Harness the Void has a chance to proc on the physical damage you're initially dealing, then on the lightning damage that you sort of temporarily are dealing but doesn't actually get applied, and then also on the cold damage that you end up dealing. So this means that you get 3 times the benefit from Harness the Void as a result of doing all of these conversions. So why not have some sort of Elementalist style, pick as many as you want set up for these conversions? Each is a 2-point node. And these could either be directly connected to the center of Trickster, as is the case in Elementalist, or they could be connected behind Harness the Void. You probably only take them in conjunction with Harness anyway, and so I don't think it would be a problem if you had a situation where you might take, say, 50%, you might take Harness the Void, then behind Harness the Void take 50% conversion of Lightning to Cold. So the first proposed new node that I'd have would be Galvanic Weaver. Now these numbers might be too weak or too strong, and testing would be needed. But with a small node that says gain 2% of physical damage as extra lightning, and then a large node behind that of gain 50% of your physical damage is converted to lightning. Now, you'd also have your reminder text, I guess, for that, which is something that would be good to have in the game. No more than 100% damage can be converted. Conversion from gems is the highest priority, then conversion from non-gem sources is used. Now, that doesn't go through all of the nuances of how conversion priority works, but it gives a reminder to someone that already knows. And so that meant it would be something really useful to get into the game, because Engineering Eternity's video on conversion mechanics, which I use as a resource when I was a newer player, that is years old now. It hasn't been updated. It's not like it's been obsoleted, it's still correct, but it's pretty hard to find because it's so many years old and conversion mechanics are just so complex. So it'd be good to have some reminder text in game for it. Cryoshock Weaver would be the next one. Again, gain 2% of lightning damage as extra cold as a small node. Then as a large node, 50% of your lightning is converted to cold. Note that you wouldn't need to take Galvanic Weaver in order to take Cryoshock Weaver. So if you were playing a build that was wanting to start with a skill Arc and then convert it to cold, you'd be able to do that with Cryoshock Weaver and you wouldn't use Galvanic Weaver. On the flip side, if you wanted to start with a skill like Bladefall, and you wanted to convert Bladefall into lightning, then lightning into cold, you would probably take Galvanic Weaver and use a physical to lightning support gem, and then you would also use Cryoshock Weaver on top. Then you have Thermal Weaver, which would be the same thing again, 2% of cold added as fire, and 50% of your cold is converted to fire. So this is 3 nodes that will give you a lot of flexibility. Then when we start bringing it together, at low gear level, this would allow an entirely new build that's previously been power gamer only to be played. Conversion shenanigans have been gated behind high-end uniques in the past, and you would be able to really make a conversion build start to work by taking, for instance, Cryoshock Weaver and Thermal Weaver on a build that is starting with Arc. You could potentially do a whole bunch of fire damage that way. And so it'd be like the Elementalist rework, and how it allowed chaos damage to ignite without the rare unique Xerfy's Heart. So it was something that was previously, shenanigans that were previously gated behind a semi-chase unique. They then became available, but only to one Ascendancy. If you wanted to play a Chaos Ignite build on an Occultist, then yes, you still needed Xerfy's Heart. But if you wanted to get a taste of that playstyle, you were able to do it without Xerfy's Heart, even if you'd never have access to that item, just by playing an Elementalist. And that's something I'm going for here. You wouldn't need to get access to Call of the Brotherhood, but of course, once you can get access to that item, you have even more flexibility and even more power. And then as you start getting gear, like, you might pick up a Pyre, then a Call of the Brotherhood and so on, you might consider unspecking these points and starting to take other ones. So for instance, you might early on use Thermal Weaver in conjunction with Cold to Fire support to fully convert cold damage to fire. But then later on, you might acquire the unique item Pyre and say, hey, I no longer need Thermal Weaver. I can now unspec Thermal Weaver, and I can spec those points into the extra power charge node. So it just gives you a lot of extra flexibility. So that's my proposal for what to do with the Trickster Ascendancy. Fundamentally, this is a redesign, although the Trickster would still have the ability to play as a damage over time build, so people that really like it could still do it. This would just give a lot of new options to the Ascendancy and add a new build in that doesn't really have support at the moment. That's all I got on this. May your Varlords have interesting results.